Hey, you're tuned in to 91.8 The Fan. Everything you want, nothing you don't. And this is Kana's Corner. And I have with me a very special guest who's been here before. We've gotten to a point where we're inviting him back. Today with me, I have
Crispin Freeman, the man himself.
So let's get right to it.
I was wondering though, for Final Fantasy, did you get any information beforehand or were they very secretive about it?
Which Final Fantasy are you talking about?
I believe you were rude in Final Fantasy VII and Final Fantasy Crisis Core.
Yes, I played Rude in the Final Fantasy Advent Children. That's the first time I played Rude, and then we did the Crisis Core game later. And I was also Setzer in Kingdom Hearts back when they had the Final Fantasy characters working with the Disney characters, which was funny because I was also doing the voice match for Orlando Bloom for Pirates of the Caribbean. So for Kingdom Hearts, there was sort of two recording crews. There was the Disney recording crew for all the Disney characters, and then there was the Square Enix recording crew for all the Final Fantasy characters. And I think I'm one of the only actors that actually ended up sort of crossing both sides of the fence, because I was both working with the Disney crew for Will Turner for Pirates, and then I was also doing Setzer from, I can't remember which Final Fantasy he comes from. 6? 5? I don't know. There's a lot of Final Fantasies.
Your guess is about as good as mine.
Yeah. Not so final, those Final Fantasies.
Yeah, pretty much after about 13, I think we've got the picture on that one. But with the, I actually didn't know that you were Setzer from Kingdom Hearts, and you did the voiceover for Will Turner. Was that sort of weird to be playing someone who's supposed to be a live action sort of hunk on the big screen, part of this major movie?
Well, I do voice matching for a couple different celebrities. I've done, obviously, I do Orlando Bloom. I did Gerard Butler for the 300 video game for the PSP. I've done voice matching for Ben Stiller for Alex the Lion for the video game and for some commercials. So it's part of the things that I do as a voice actor. It's fun to do. It's fun to get somebody and really be able to sort of be able to match their voice and play that character. I guess that's one of the big advantages of being a voice actor is the range of different characters you can play. So it is sort of funny, the whole Orlando Bloom thing, the fact that I can sort of imitate his voice and record for Disney. It meant that I got to know about the new films before anyone else did, because they were making the video games at the same time they were making the second and third Pirates films, because they wanted to release them all concurrently. So I was recording for the later video games, and of course they had story elements from Pirates 2 and Pirates 3, and a character would come up and I'm like, who's Xiao Fang? What's this all about? And they're like, well, we're going to tell you, but if you tell anyone else, we're going to have to kill you. I was like, what? It's like, well, this character's in it and that character's in it, and this is what happens. I'm like, really? It's like, yes, and you can't tell anyone for the next 6 months. I was like, okay, I'll be quiet. I'll be good.
Oh, I love those NDAs. We've had our share problems with Square Enix NDAs. Were those extreme? It sounds like it.
The NDAs are not too extreme. They're pretty standard. I think it's sort of funny. I totally understand that they don't want me to release plot points about the story or gameplay. That's totally understandable. They want everybody to have a new, fresh experience, and they don't want any spoilers. What I think is funny is when I can't even talk about being in the game. We know the cast of a Hollywood movie 6 months before they go into principal photography. We know who's playing Iron Man or who's playing Batman or whatever. But God forbid I be playing Iron Man in Marvel Ultimate Alliance 2 and I say anything about it before the video game comes out, because somehow that's going to mess things up. I don't always understand the rationale behind that, but there you go.
Yeah, I can understand. If you'll let me get into a small little story time really quick. We all this week attempted to try and get the Final Fantasy 13 people on, and we tried for the past 3 months or so for this week, because we knew we were going to have copies to give away and whatnot. And it was funny because we would call agents and they'd be like, well, if they're in it, they're kind of in it. I really can't say, but we can see. And so it's quite entertaining on our side to, okay, you finally get the call. The NDAs are up. They'll call you now.
Yeah, it's very odd. It's almost that I mean, in Japan, there's certainly the celebrity aspect of being a voice actor, and so with being a voice actor and bringing your celebrity to the project, that helps with marketing and promotion and developing buzz about whatever project you're working on. But somehow in America, they don't quite understand voice actor celebrity. Like that doesn't compute. They understand on camera celebrity. But the idea that someone's voice is being brought to a project and that the fans might get excited about that, and maybe it might be good to tell the fans about that to start buzz about it, somehow they haven't figured out their coordination on that yet.
It's true, and it's a little sad, but that's why we try and celebrate the voice actors somewhat on 91.8 Fan.
Well, thank
Because
you.
without you guys, we wouldn't have, Final Fantasies and God of War 3s and BioShock 2s. We'd kind
There
of
you
be
go.
stuck with silent movies still.
Yeah, so that horrible computerized voice off the Macintosh.
Oh no, not Microsoft Sam. Now, with Final Fantasy specifically, since I know you have a tendency to have an insight or analyze sort of things for your classes and whatnot, do you think Final Fantasy, after all these, 20s, thousands of years, it seems like now, has really ingrained itself into the gamer and anime culture?
Well, it's funny that you ask that because I do all these presentations about storytelling in animation and the mythology behind it. And I invited a producer that I worked with on White Knight Chronicles, which is a big Japanese RPG, and I played the main villain in that. And so I invited her to one of my presentations, and she absolutely loved it. And the first thing out of her mouth was, "Can you do one of these about video games?" And I said, well, I'd always been meaning to, but now you've sort of lit the fire under me. Let's see if I can get it done. So I started thinking about RPGs, and I started thinking about Final Fantasy. And lo and behold, what do they release on the iPhone App Store but Final Fantasy 1? So I plopped down my $9 and bought Final Fantasy 1 for my iPhone, and I've been playing it sort of obsessively. And what's fascinating to me, because this is what I like to do, I like to go back to the oldest version of whatever it is to try to figure out what tropes were developed at the source, so to speak. Let's go back to the original Giant Robot show. Let's go back to the first superhero show. So I said, okay, let's go back to the first Final Fantasy game. What is it about this game that was so captivating that it basically reinvigorated Square Enix? Because it was supposed to be their final game. And I've read online that the creator said, I'm not good at twitchy shoot 'em up gameplay. I'm good at telling a story. And if this is our final game, and if this doesn't work, we're throwing in the towel. Well, it worked, and now they're stuck with the name. And so I wanted to go back and say, well, what worked? Why did this work so well? And what's amazing to me is how similar the tropes are from back then to today. You walk up to a damn character, you push towards them, you click on them, and 3 little dots show up above their head as an ellipse because they want to talk to you. And that trope has not changed since 1987. That sort of blows my mind, that we haven't found a new way of expressing character needs to talk, put an exclamation point over their head, And
That's
so
true. You still see that in like MMORPGs and things like that very commonly.
Absolutely. It's like, wow. So there are certain things that were figured out on Final Fantasy 1 that we're still using, and we will probably still be using on Final Fantasy 100. And so that kind of thing goes, all right, if it's sticking around that long, it's obviously important. Something's going on. And so I'm going through the game, and I'm trying to play all the way through it. This is the only challenge with doing sort of my study of games, is they take so long.
Oh,
You know,
yes,
I can
especially
sit-
Final Fantasy.
especially these 80 hours of gameplay, 150 hours of gameplay later, and I'm like, all right, I got through one game. What's the next one? As opposed to sitting down and watching a 2-hour movie and being able to unpack the story there. So it's taking me a while, so I have to be very selective about the games that I choose. Otherwise, I will not be able to do anything else in my life. But it is very interesting, and I'll be curious to see how to compare that with the different iterations as Final Fantasy came along. So yes, I'm sort of down the rabbit hole on that. Nothing definitive yet, but especially with RPGs, because they're so much based in the sort of fantasy storytelling, and modern fantasy storytelling is a pretty recent invention in a way. We've been telling fantastical stories since Homer's The Odyssey, but our modern notion of fantasy that is sort of done in Final Fantasy, where you have dragons and white mages and black mages and fighters and thieves. I mean, this all sort of has its roots no farther back than Tolkien, and before Tolkien, in things like Alice in Wonderland and other fantasy writings around that time.
And there's also a huge change between Western, fantasy and Eastern fantasy. It's huge.
Absolutely. The first thing I love is that you can be a white mage or a black mage. What? There's no Gandalf the Black. It's Gandalf the White. A black mage in Western storytelling is always on the wrong side of the equation. They're always the Dark Lord that needs to be defeated. But in Final Fantasy, if you don't put that black mage in your crew, you're going to be in trouble because his spells are really useful and powerful, and you sort of need them. And he's sort of cute.
That too.
He's sort of cute. So it's very interesting to me that the battle is not light versus dark. The battle is you better have not only a black mage and a white mage. Oh, and by the way, you can have a red mage that can do both. What? That's not the way it tends to work in Western fantasy storytelling. So already there's this sort of playing with pairs of opposites that doesn't tend to get done in Western fantasy storytelling. So that's also the kind of stuff I love to unpack.
Like you mentioned specifically about White Knight Chronicles, and it's apparent to me that in that game you have so many choices and you're free to do whatever you want with your characters.
Right. You are free. And unlike something like some of the Star Wars games, you're free to choose either the light side or the dark side of the Force. But you don't get to be both. The more you slide down one path, the more you're not down the other path. This idea that you can, even in Dungeons and Dragons, you can be sort of lawful good or chaotic evil. You can't be both. I mean, you can be neutral, but that's sort of in between.
Oh, definitely. And I feel really bad. I actually am playing White Knight Chronicles, and I don't even think I've gotten to your character yet.
Have you met a character named Seti?
I don't think so.
Okay, you will.
Yes. I remember the town exploding, and that's the last I was able to play of it.
Yes, there's a character that comes along. He's a little older than the main crew of characters. His name is Seti, and he seems to have all sorts of secret knowledge about stuff. So that's the first time you'll hear my voice.
Oh, okay. I mean, it seems like a really good game, but much like you, I'm in the same boat. I can't find time to play these 80-hour epics.
Oh my God, they're so long. I mean, which is great, but as someone who's just going in and trying to find the patterns and talk about the story of what's going on, it's like, wow, but I guess that's what YouTube's for. You can get on and watch the speed throughs and the perfect games that people have posted up, and then you don't have to worry about it.
There is that too, but I think in a sense for role-playing games, the reason why a good deal of them are so successful is because they rely on story, and then they stick you with that story for so long, and it has an emotional impact by the end.
Yes, it is interesting, the sort of interactive story. I mean, the guys who did Dungeons and Dragons back in the day, Gary Gygax and all those guys, I mean, they were taking a lot of their inspiration from Tolkien and what they were creating. And the whole idea was, we love Tolkien, now we want to interact with it. And so their way to interact with it was with the Monster Manual and the Player's Handbook and the Dungeon Master's Guide. And now that we have computers that are really fast, our way of interacting is World of Warcraft. And, and so it's still the same thing. But it is interesting that something like, even in World of Warcraft, even though I really haven't played it much, there's still a story. As much as they try to make it a sandbox where you can go wherever you want, there's new packages that come out, or there's new villains to defeat, and there is a story going on. The Japanese are very heavy on their story. They really like making sure the story is set up right, because that's sort of the way fantasy works. The fate of the world hangs in the, balance of one person's action. That's usually how fantasy works.
Yes, I'm very much a gamer who can't play a game if the story is not there. Like, I'll be honest with you, we had a very long talk last time about God of War 3, but I could never get into the first one because, no offense, Kratos is such a douche. I know that's terrible to say, but like, I don't want to help you. You're just killing people. I don't want to relate to you because I'm not bloodthirsty. I'm sorry.
And isn't that interesting? I had a very interesting discussion about that with the guys, with all the Japanese RPGs I work on. And a lot of the creators for those are feeling a little frustrated recently because it feels like the majority of gaming, like the gravitational pull, is towards the first person shooter. And so it's the Halos and the Gears of War and the all that kind of stuff. And the thing I've noticed about the Halos is that the guys who really like Halo rarely play the campaign. They rarely play the story. They just want to get online and do multiplayer and frag their friends, which is awesome, which is great. But that tends to be the dominant American way of wanting to play games, and not the Japanese way. The Japanese way says, no, let's have 16 hours of cutscenes in Xenosaga. Let's have vast stretches of storytelling so that we can relate to these characters and then interact with them in this different way. And so it's very interesting how these cultures come up differently and how it affects the way they tell their games. Because as far as I'm concerned, games are the first new art form we've had since cinema. And it's very, very much still in its adolescent sort of juvenile stages. And so we're all still trying to figure out, how do you make Lawrence of Arabia as a video game? Something of that level of artistic achievement, but in this new medium called gaming, this interactive, nonlinear storytelling medium.
Oh, definitely. And video games on their own are still very young as an art form. And we actually had one guest on who does lectures about video games and growing up as sort of an art form. And it's funny, when you look at video games nowadays, they can't even go with a love scene without getting banhammered by CNN and Fox News and everything else.
Isn't it sad? They can shoot the hell out of whatever they want, but violence is fine. But somehow, if someone starts snogging on screen, we've got problems. I've never quite understood that standard. I don't get it.
It's okay. I don't get it either.
And like, the chances of there ever being a dating sim on this side of the Pacific is just, it's so funny, because they're popular in Japan. This idea that and there used to be one. There was one for the Macintosh way back in the 80s, called Trust and Betrayal: The Legacy of Subut. And it was all about relationships. You were this character that had psychic abilities, and everyone around you had psychic abilities, and so it was all about relating to the other characters and understanding their emotions and everything, and you didn't shoot anyone. It was sort of amazing. And somehow that sort of, those types of games don't always get into the mainstream of American gaming. But I'm really excited now about the little small games, the downloadable games, because that's where a lot of the experimenting is going on, and a lot of the playing with this new art form, where you don't have to have 80 hours of shooting things, but you can have things like Flower and Flow and all these interesting little games that are playing with video games as an art form.
I'm lame. The most in-depth game I've played on a handheld is probably Plants vs. Zombies.
So who is your guest that you had on talking about video games?
His name is Daniel Floyd. He's just a YouTuber, but he's received a lot of popularity because he tackles issues such as, video games and storytelling, video games and sex, if it comes up. And it's an interesting insight. If you want, if you have the time, I can link him to you after the interview.
Yeah, I'd love to check it out.
All right, we're going to take a short break. Make sure to keep it tuned to 91.8 The Fan. Everything you want, nothing you don't. We'll be right back.
Ever wonder what's going on in the anime world? Check out 918 The Fan every weekday for the newest iStock. We'll fill you in on everything you need to know in 3 minutes or less. Only on 918thefan.com.
Hey, and we're back, and things are awesome. We're here with Crispin Freeman, I'm telling you, the man himself, and we're about to talk about some Final Fantasy goodness. In relation to how big of a game Final Fantasy is, when you were first, shifted into the booth for that, did you think, I'm a part of the Final Fantasy game, or is that kind of not happen anymore? The excitement.
Well, it's always sort of interesting when you get part of a franchise like Final Fantasy or Pirates of the Caribbean or God of War, because each franchise has its own sort of culture or sensibility. And so you've stepped into something much bigger than yourself when you do Final Fantasy, because you're aware that there's a history behind it and there's so much fandom and so much lore about the franchise. So when I stepped into Final Fantasy, it was very much like stepping into Lord of the Rings and saying, okay, where do I fit? Because we were auditioning for different characters. And I was totally surprised that they cast me as Rude. That's not necessarily where I would have cast myself, but it worked out perfectly. I thought, yeah, this actually works quite well. And so getting into it, there's certainly so much care that the Square Enix people take about making sure that the show is or the game is just the way they like it. They're very particular about stuff, which is wonderful. It's wonderful to be that discerning and that specific about stuff, and to care that much about getting it just so. And me, as someone who does my best to understand Japanese culture and especially mythological storytelling, they really appreciated that I cared about it that much. Actually, a funny story, when I was being brought in for White Knight Chronicles, I actually replaced the actor who had first played this character, and they had a hard time getting the performance they wanted, I guess. I don't know the details about it. But the Japanese producer came up to me and said, this character that you are playing, it's like Sephiroth from Final Fantasy. And I just looked at her and I said, wakarimashita. And she's like, oh, arigatou gozaimasu. I mean, she was just so happy that I understood sort of where things were coming from, and that I understood the shorthand. Yes, I get it. This is the Bishonen character. Yes, I get it. The kind of villain you're looking for. I get it. The kind of hero you're looking for. I get the kind of story we're going on. Sure, let's fire it up and roll it. They really appreciate that I understand that. So it was great fun, and especially when we finally got to see it done, because I didn't, I had a sense of Advent Children, but I didn't really understand that Rude and Reno were sort of the comic relief of the film, that we sort of get the crap beat out of us through the whole thing, and everyone's giggling and laughing, and Quentin Flynn, who was playing the Reno, we were sitting next to each other in the movie theater, and I'm like, Quentin, we're funny, aren't we? We're like Mutt and Jeff. This is really good. So it was quite fun.
I'll make sure to tell him you said that when he's on Friday.
Oh, okay, good.
Well, no, did you guys get to play off of each other, or was the recording completely separate?
Completely separate. That's why I had no idea. There's a wonderful picture I put up online of me and Quentin and Steve Bloom at the Final Fantasy Advent Children wrap party after the film. And we're all smiling because we never heard each other's performances. And we're like, oh, that's what it sounded like. I'm not even sure if I knew Quentin was playing Reno. I don't think I understood the relationship between Rude and Reno that well. I mean, I sort of got it as we were doing it, but I didn't get how much we were the comic relief until I saw the whole show. And Cloud is so serious. And I go, oh, I get it. And I hadn't heard Steve's performance as Vincent. And so when everything comes together on the screen, you go, oh, I get it now. All right, that's cool.
That is really neat. And I loved, in a way, when I was doing the research, because I actually didn't know that you were Rude, even though I had watched Final Fantasy Advent Children until I was, looking at the stats sheet. But I thought it was kind of entertaining to see that you were basically portraying a black guy.
Which is not the first time, actually. I played a black guy in Black Muay Thai Fighter in Tekken 5, which was sort of funny and silly. It's very odd when stuff like that happens. I sort of go, really? You want me to play the black guy? Okay, I'll do it. It helps that I was raised by a black woman on the south side of Chicago for a lot of my childhood, and I was sort of raised in hip-hop culture when I was younger. But it is sort of funny because I just look so white, and not only so white, so sort of English white. And so when the idea that I could actually play a black guy or any character of color with any sort of believability, I think sort of stretches people's credulity. But, I think it sort of worked as Rude.
I mean, you guys seem like you had a lot of fun on it, and without you guys, it would have been just some serious, so Cloud's going emo again.
Yeah. We got to have another little flavor in there somewhere just to, change it up a bit. Little spice.
Now, out of curiosity, besides God of War 3, do you have anything brand new that is going to come out soon, or that you're working on you can talk about?
Well, there's lots of things I'm talking about, but if I told you, I'd have to kill you.
I understand.
Yeah, no, it's so funny. I mean, usually I can only talk about stuff that's already come out. So God of War 3 is great. I was in Marvel Ultimate Alliance 2 playing Iron Man. And there are some cool stuff on the horizon that I think may be coming, but I can't talk about it. It's so frustrating. So it's like, when they have to announce it first before I can say anything.
Oh, no, obviously I understand, but just in case, I'm going to say the congratulations now, since we heard Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya got licensed to the second season.
Oh, did it?
Yes.
Oh, good. See, I didn't even know. They haven't even told me.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
None of the fans believe me when I say that, but honestly, the fans know long before I know what's happening because I don't have time to be searching on every website for all the news. And on top of which, there are times when I've been told things and, oh yeah, that's definitely going to happen. And then it never pans out. So I've just stopped trying to guess it and just go, you know what? I'm going to wait until the studio calls me and lets me know when I'm supposed to come in to record because until that happens, I have no idea.
Yeah, I can totally understand. We actually saw I think it's the ASOS Brigade videos, the videos they do on the official Haruhi Suzumiya site that looks like a mock-up of whatever Haruhi would do if she was unleashed on the internet.
Right.
And it said they were releasing it in a box set together, so we'll see when or where or when it happens, but hopefully it'll be soon. More work for you is always a plus.
Oh, yes. Always good.
And it's a pleasure to have you on the show again. Thank you so much.
You bet. It's been a pleasure to be here. Thanks so much.